So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers and colleagues, once again, welcome for the second day of the executive training course for policymakers on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which is organized by the UN Office for Sustainable Development based in Incheon, South Korea. I hope some of you were there yesterday. So again, this as the people, the people who are the former participants and then who are familiar with the course, we call it the executive training course for policymakers. So this year, normally we hold this, just to give you a bit of history, we hold this meeting in May, but this year we could not do this last year, actually in 2020, because of COVID-19. And then this is for the same reason. Today we are meeting virtually because we were hoping that COVID-19 would let us meet in person, but this is not possible this year. And I would like to just again for the history yesterday, and then as I mentioned, the executive training course is aligned on the high-level political forum and the voluntary national reviews, and we picked up 5 of the SDGs that will go under in-depth review in the HLPF next July. And yesterday we started the session and we talked about the SDG 3 on good health and well-being. And tonight we will talk about the SDG 8 on decent work and economic growth. And before going further, actually I should let you, I'd like to introduce Miss Licia Yu Saner-Yu. She helped us to organize this year's executive training for policymaker, and she will be also our guide for the rest of the week. So Licia, I will give you the floor now.
Arogong, for the introduction, and I like to share my slides so that will be more clear in terms of what I'm going to say. And at the same time, I want to thank the presence of Mr. Park. You know, it is indeed late, and then to be able to have you also join with us, it's really a great pleasure. But as always happens, that the one of the key figure of the process had never really got a chance to be introduced. So I want to remind everybody that Dr. Arogong's CV is on the on the website, and it's very impressive in terms of the work that he has been doing, considering the sustainable development, but also recovery work. So I welcome you to have a close look of his very distinguished career. But let me just also remind everybody in terms of the office, UN Office for Sustainable Development, and its mission and its purpose. And I think it is very important that we know from yesterday's session, also Professor Kim's lecture, we see that the transformation opportunities offered by the SDG goals and also 2030 agenda, it's broad, it's depth, it's deep, and also potentially can yield tremendous benefits in terms of achieving the national development objective. But it's not easy. So UNOSD, in principle, is here to help the member states and the community in terms of mapping and assessing and improving the exchange of knowledge, resources, and also provide concrete assistance. In terms of the course, I think we have already highlighted, and you have most likely read it in the the concept note for this particular program. It is aligned to the HLPF, especially in support of preparation of the voluntary national report. But I would also like to say that the process started also at the local level. So that is a declaration of voluntary local review. And also major cities around the world are actually providing their sustainable development report. And initially the language was varied, but it's similar to the national, now the national report, that is alignment and synchronization between the two. So without further, sort of elaborating on that, I just wanted to remind everybody that why are we doing this and why are we sitting together all the way from North America to East Asia, with a huge time differences in between. It is to raise awareness. It is still not sufficient known by the people that need to also take personal commitment to change behavior in order to contribute to the progress of SDGs. We need to share information and experiences in terms of some of the most wicked problems that we are confronted with. As you know, that we have, since the 2000, we already committed to eradicate poverty. And I think, what we have seen is that the COVID is throwing us back in terms of the progress made. And also we want to sort of have opportunities to look at some of the concrete field experiences and to learn from that. So with these few words, I would like to hand over to today's moderator of the session, Professor Raymond Senner. He's Organization and International Management of Basel University, but he's also has been sort of very active in promoting diplomacy dialogue between different state and non-state actors. That includes business as well as civil societies and NGOs. And he has written many papers and articles, and his most recent book, together with 3 other authors, is looking at public goods in terms of sustainability and what business can contribute. So with these few words, I would just hand over to Raymond. But before I do that, I wanted to sort of inform the participants in terms of the interaction. We apologize for the limitation of the website, so that we were not able to allow you to speak directly to the panelists, the lecturers, nor show your image in person. But instead, we encourage you to use the chat and also the question and answer functions. We would respond to your questions and comments directly if we can, or if not, we would find a way to communicate back to you if you prefer. And we would like to also invite you to provide feedback, because this is very important. We're all learning about using this new technology in order to create learning community in the virtual space without necessarily have some possibility for social interaction at the site, which is part of the sort of highlights and of many of the meetings. So your feedback will help us to make this experience and design more effective, more meaningful. So please fill out the form, 7 questions, tick the answers that's suitable, and write down, if you want, some of the comments in the space provided. So with these words, I hand it over to Raymond, and let's have a very good session today, and also stimulating, and also allow us to raise further questions. Thank you. Ramon, you are muted.
I know. I think
you are now
hear me now, no?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your kind introduction. It's a great pleasure to be together with our colleagues of UNOSD, but also with the speakers and colleagues and with the participants who are listening in. I'm now not sure whether you can see my slide.
Not yet.
No?
Not yet.
I believe you need to share your screen. I don't know if you have.
At the bottom, next to the 3 dots.
Yeah. Share.
Yeah, now it's coming.
Now it's there. All right. Thanks, Jerome.
No, you have to go further.
Yeah. How about that? Everybody sees it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, very good. All right. So today, as Alicia already mentioned, we're talking about SDG 8. This particular goal has its label, its title, Decent Work and Economic Growth. And it's supposed to help countries to embark on a path where they can promote a sustained, inclusive, and sustainable form of economic growth, which would also result in full and productive employment and decent work for all. That's the overall understanding of what SDG 8 is supposed to be about. In more detail, there are, of course, the targets. Like every goal has different targets and indicators. And in terms of SDG 8, there are 12 targets. I will not go into it in more detail. Everybody can just visit the SDG knowledge platform and see the different targets. What our session today is about some specific issues as to employment, but also in regards to job creation. And of course, we have COVID-19. According to UNCTAD and also the World Bank's estimation, there could be 1.6 billion workers who could lose their job, especially those working in the informal economy, which is already a very precarious place to work in. But with the whole COVID-19, the repercussions could be that they just simply are without a job. Being without a job and surrounded by poor environments and families that need the support of the person employed or working in the informal economy, of course, it endangers and puts into question the survival of their livelihoods. Economists overall agree what we're experiencing now, and let's not forget it's not over. Probably it will continue to be a very, very difficult situation for all of us in regards to the pandemic. And there's an assessment that this is the worst economic recession since the Great Depression. And in case it continues all the way to the end of this year, probably it will be even outdoing the Great Depression of the 30s. 400 million jobs losses are feared for the second quarter of 2020. That's already in the past. This will be extended into 2021. So we have an enormous amount of jobs that already have been lost and might be lost also in the coming months. And hence, it is good to remind us what this SDG and the 2030 agenda is all about. It's supposed to be a combination and an integration of 3 dimensions: the economic, social, and environmental sustainability. They're all interconnected. They're all interdependent. And we have to focus with our efforts in our countries and in our cities and wherever we live to do our best to make it a multiplier-based intervention So when we want to do something about improving the jobs or the economy, to already anticipate this will have, of course, repercussions in the social sphere, environmental sphere. We don't want to have one benefit and the other side loses in terms of the three dimensions. We should think holistically, and this is also true for SDG 8. We have today the great honor and privilege to have three very interesting presentations. The first one, and I will introduce the speakers shortly, but the first presentation will look at the global supply chain, which at the same time, of course, also links with to the global value chain. What is this all about? We have done our work on the global supply chain ourselves in terms of agricultural commodities. The question before the pandemic started already was the question, is this really what we want? Is this the best way to organize the global economy? Is just the efficiency in price sufficient to justify the way we have arranged our economy? Do people benefit equally from the global supply chains, be it the workers, be it the people contributing to the global supply chains, as well as the intermediaries, and finally also the consumers? Then we will have a presentation on the youth employment side, which of course, as you all know, in many of our countries, the youth are now, particularly with the pandemic, are even more in difficulties because either the schools are closed or they have to stay at home. And already the job opportunities have been scarce before the pandemic. Now, with the pandemic lasting much longer than we expected, there will be even more difficulties for the young to find a job or to get into the job market. And we'll have a presentation from our colleague from Nigeria who represents the interest of the youth. And finally, we have a colleague from Italy who will also talk about the economy and the regional development in northern Italy, where it's not just creating enterprises, there can be many kinds of enterprises, traditional private sector enterprises, but there could also be cooperatives, and there could be social enterprises. And he will give a very good overview of what is actually happening in northern Italy. Let me now go to the first presenter, Dr. Daniel Von Whitehead. He's a senior economist, works at the ILO, and has previously also worked for the Economic Commission in Brussels. Daniel is at the same time, he is an expert and focuses on policy making in regards to employment, but is also at the same time a teacher and a researcher. He publishes and keeps on adding to our understanding what global supply chains are all about and how we should take into consideration ways maybe to improve the way the global supply chains are organized. Without much further ado, I would like to hand over to Daniel. Daniel, it's all yours.
Well, thanks a lot, Raymond, for this nice introduction. It's always a pleasure, to be part of this program. And welcome to all of you. I would have liked to, welcoming you, in a nice conference room at the ILO, but next time. So, I hope we'll be able to make it. So, but what I would like to do today, and if you look at the next slides, and first of all, my thanks in advance to Hu Yong, who will be helping me to present the slides. What I would like to do is really to see, decent work from the global supply chains perspective. And for this, it's really important to know what are we talking about. Why global supply chains became a dominant business model? What are the benefits, drawbacks? And then to give you a couple of figures on, what about decent work in global supply chains, and more globally, what about the internal functioning of global supply chains? And of course, I mean, as Raymond did, we will put this, into the current context of the COVID-19 crisis and the effects that this crisis had in terms of decent work in global supply chains. So first, I mean, next slides is about, what was the model before? Because before, it was a quite stable, trade arrangements that we had. Until the 1980s, you had, for example, clothing and footwear and industries. They were characterized by mass-produced standardized styles that did not change much, from one season to another. And then, the majority of production materials were relatively close to the end consumers. And, this is the period when the United States and many European countries had flourishing, textiles, clothing industries. And one feature of this business model was that, whatever, the location of the operations, the brands were owning the factories and they were owning the employees. So they had to manage their labor force, they had to manage their factories, their different affiliates. And of course, I mean, all was relatively stable. The supplier base was usually regional, and seasonal collections were divided, generally speaking, into two collections, spring, summer, and autumn, winter. So this was the business model. And, when you see next slide, I mean, we try to see how come we moved massively to a new business model, to outsourcing. And clearly there, I mean, it's, the answer is obvious. I mean, it's because this model is extremely successful. And, all brands shifted, to outsourcing, which implies, I mean, to ask suppliers, so independent entities, to produce for you the goods that you need, I mean, to reach the consumers in the end markets. And the main advantage of this shift is really to save costs. Can you imagine the cost before of owning entire factories, own employees, the production costs, etc., the transportation costs? Now, I mean, it's all shifted to your suppliers. And of course, you have to manage your suppliers, but the responsibility is not yours anymore. And the costs are not yours anymore either. And one more thing, this shift to the outsourcing model matches with the just-in-time production, with the aim to have zero stocks, because of course having stocks is expensive. And now, I mean, there is more rotation. I mean, you have to be more quickly on the markets, I mean, to feed the consumers in the retailers. So clearly there, I mean, you want the suppliers, I mean, to take responsibility, and you want the suppliers to be quick and to deliver without stocks so that you don't have to pay for those. And of course, I mean, you can see that in this model is a way to shift the responsibility on other actors. The next slide is, about the contributing factors. And clearly, globalization helped with the emergence of the World Trade Organizations. Just, China and India joining WTO really opened quite a lot of trade opportunities, I mean, for those huge sourcing countries. And of course, I mean, then you had also, the phasing out of the multi-fiber arrangements that really led a number of developing emerging countries to be able, I mean, to produce at the same costs and even lower due to their comparative cost in terms of labor and to feed the international markets. Then, another factor is really the improvements in terms of logistics and transport services that clearly have generated more reliable and speedy delivery of, the goods, I mean, to arrive, to the retailers. And of course, I mean, the progress in the information era also helped. I mean, the fact that you can, in a way, interact in real times with the different actors, the suppliers, the transporters of your supply chain, really helps, I mean, to have this business model based on a lead firm that will have to somehow manage the different actors in its supply chain. And of course, the governments also helped, this movement, because, you had a certain number of industrial policies, a certain number of sourcing countries started to attract suppliers, of global supply chains to produce, from their countries with, export areas, export zones, industrial districts where you have tax facilities, deductions of taxes, the land at very low prices. So of course there was a sort of competition between developing and emerging countries to attract global supply chains. Next factor is precisely about the different actors. And you can see that you have so many actors. And this is a simple supply chain. I could show you a very complex one, but clearly you see that it goes from the lead firms as a buyer to the whole supply chain, from the provider of raw materials, the producers, storage, eventually transporters at every single segment and step of the supply chain, vendors, intermediaries, distributors, retailers, just, to be there in time for the right quantity of the goods at the right prices for the consumers. Next slide is about precisely the benefits of this model. And not only was it successful, for the buyers, because they could really accumulate huge profits, in a number of years. And you could see, that brands really won all records in terms of profitability over the last few years before the crisis, but for some of them even during the crisis. And clearly, this is really profitable for the lead firms. But it was really extremely successful. It is extremely successful in terms of trade. And now we know that although firms involved in the supply chains correspond to more or less 15 to 20% of the of the number of firms in total, they accumulate 80% of trade. So 80% of trade today is due to global supply chains. So clearly it is the dominant business model. And what is interesting is that really participating in global supply chains grew so fast, so quickly. And we know that it increased from 35% in the 70s to over 50% in 2015, and even more today. What is also important, it's a very successful model in terms of trade, very successful model in terms of growth, but also in terms of productivity. And according to the World Bank estimates, the supply chain participation in supply chain is boosting per capita income growth by more than 1%, about twice as much as standard trade. So it's really productive in terms of business model, and it was really extremely successful in terms of employment. And we know that millions of jobs have been created in supply chains, and you can see here the figures. We have now, more than 500 million, global supply chain related jobs. So extremely successful. And, next slide, is showing you that, you also had millions of jobs created in the textile sector, for example, especially for women. So it's a leverage also for women's participation in the labor markets. And it allowed also developing countries to participate in international trade. And the example of China is fabulous, because China shifted from a sourcing country on rather traditional goods, to progressively evolve towards higher value added processes. And now China is involved in what we call South-South trade, because they became lead firms themselves, to operate with other developing countries for more traditional goods. So you can see that it's also a way for a number of developing countries and emerging countries to shift towards higher value added products. At the same time, you have benefits, you also have increased vulnerability. We know that 8,000, for example, textile, clothing, and footwear production units were closed after the crisis of 2008, with the loss of 11 million jobs around the world. And we know that there have been immediate job losses also during the COVID-19 crisis. We also know that the sort of benefits from the different countries is also very diversified, depending on their position on the different segments of the production process. Certain countries like China succeeded to shift towards higher value-added products, but other countries are sort of confined into more traditional labor cost segments, like Bangladesh on garments products. So clearly here, you have an unequal distribution of growth and benefits of global supply chains. And something that we should add is that we know that at the end of global supply chains, you have very low wages and poor working conditions. And this, in fact, leads me to the next slide about precisely two major problems that I would like to attract your attention on today. The first one is that, of course, it's a business model that is dominating, extremely successful, extremely profitable in terms of growth, including and a lot for developing and emerging countries, and it's also very profitable in terms of employment. But this business model leaves a total space of non-responsibility in terms of environmental protection first, but then also in terms of social responsibility, in terms of security, health and safety measures, wages, working time. And I will give you a couple of slides to show you, this problem in terms of social sustainability in global supply chains. And the second major problem I would like to attract your attention on is the unequal redistribution of value added along the global supply chains and unbalanced purchasing practices between the lead firms and suppliers and the other actors in the global supply chain. Next slide is precisely about decent work. And I would like to present you results that we have from a series of surveys we did at the ILO on 1,500 suppliers, but also we had case studies in more than 30 suppliers in 5 countries in different continents. And we also had a survey among buyers themselves to close the loop. You can see here the map of all the surveys we did in the different countries. And the next slide is precisely presenting you a couple of results about wages, for example. We know that from the case studies, when you go into the factories, you have double, even triple records. So impossible to know exactly what is the reality in terms of wage levels and wage practices. Problems of legal compliance on the number of working hours, which are excessive, overtime payments, which are not always done, high intensity at work with the number of accidents at work, so health and safety issues, and even non-compliance to the payment of the minimum wage, although we know that the minimum wage is already very low in a number of countries where it exists. If you take Ethiopia, for example, there's no minimum wage, which is one reason why it attracted quite a lot of global supply chains to have producers from that country. Very rudimentary pay systems like piece rates, so these are not really good for the workers, very stressful. Workers do not take any breaks to go to the toilets or to go on holidays, because otherwise they would be paid the minimum wage and they can do more in terms of piece rates. And a general lack of social dialogue and sometimes even no acceptance of trade unions. And the next slide is confirming this with results from the survey we did among suppliers. And we can see that this business model does not ensure coverage of basic needs for all workers. And you can see that here, we don't have the time to go into the details, but grossly, 56% of workers reported that their wages were insufficient to meet basic needs of themselves and their families. And this is not only about, covering education, healthcare, but it is also about covering food and accommodation. And we know that the current health crisis even exacerbated this problem with, in particular, increased healthcare costs. The next slide is also about the gap in terms of social dialogue. And we ask here to all suppliers, do you have any workers' representatives? And you can see that, of course, I mean, 78% said yes, but you can see that, 39% is about workers' committees without trade unions. You have less than 40% which have trade unions in the company. But you can see here on the right, we also ask them, do you have those workers' representatives involved in any negotiations on wage issues? And you can see that here you have less than 1/3 of companies where workers' representatives are indeed involved in negotiations on wage issues. And the next slide is also quite illustrative because it shows not only wage problems, but health and security problem with the tragedy of the Rana Plaza. So nothing to add on this, but this was, let's say, the culminating point of the decent work deficit in global supply chains. Next slide is about the second problem. This unequal redistribution of value added along the supply chains. We don't have much time here, but to illustrate this unequal redistribution, I just want to give you an example of a t-shirt. Retail costs $69 US, and you can see that direct labor costs are 0.71 cents. And total labor cost for that t-shirt, which is sold $69 US, is 2.14 US dollars. So, this is less than 2% of the retailer margin. It's less than 2% of the retail price. So this is to give you a flavor of the unequal redistribution of value added for the production of a t-shirt, for example. But, I could give you plenty of examples with different other types of goods that are produced in global supply chains. Next slide is also about purchasing practices, because we know that the relationship between the buyers and suppliers, of course, is influencing wages and working conditions along the supply chain. And here I would like to just give you a few examples. I mean, this is a study we did on the basis of the survey. For the first time, we were able, with some econometric analysis, to identify the exact effects of unequal purchasing practices between the buyers and the suppliers on wages. And you can see that here. First, we found that a lot of suppliers had to accept prices from the buyers that were below their production costs. So you can see that this is not profitable for the suppliers, but they have to accept that because they have employees, to pay. They prefer, to operate below production costs than not having anything. So in fact, you can see that the fact that they accept prices below production costs is leading to wages decreasing by 10% among suppliers. Inaccurate technical specifications provided by the brand is leading to additional sampling. This is also leading to minus 12% of wage decrease among suppliers. Inaccurate order forecasts, let's say that, they give you orders, too late, or the orders are changed, minus 11% effects on wages. And also orders with insufficient lead time is leading, surprisingly, to an increase of wages. But why? Because suppliers have to accumulate overtime hours. So in total wages, workers will be paid more, but it's because they have to accumulate an extremely number of working hours, which is leading to a slight increase in total wages, but to the detriment of stress, of also health of workers. And the example of mass faintings in Cambodia, for example, with a number of reasons explaining why workers are just fainting during the production process. Next slide is also about the effects of the pandemic on decent work, but also on purchasing practices precisely. And we know now that the pandemic has led to partial and complete shutdown for a number of factories in producing countries, with millions of factory workers who lost their job without legally mandated pay or severance. And I must say that many informal workers were, paying the price because they were the first one, of course. I mean, not, to be allowed, to work again for the factory. All the cancellations became something quite frequent during the crisis, with immediate effects on businesses and workers. I just would like to give you the example of Bangladesh, where 46% of suppliers reported that all or most of their already almost entirely completed orders had been cancelled by their buyers. The goods were already produced, they were cancelled. And 58% of factories reported to have shut down most of their operations because of this cancellation process. So this, to illustrate the extreme fragility of a system based on buyers being able to stop or shift operations from one day to the other. And in the next slide, I would like, really to stress that these global trends are not sustainable at global and at country level anymore. Enterprise wage development, especially along supply chains, are not sustainable either. And it's really important these days, to look at the global supply chain debate within that sustainability logic. And, if you want sustainability, this requires institutions, changing mentalities and practices, and more responsibilities of different actors. And in this respect, the next slide, in the next slide, I would like to show you that it's not that the margin do not exist within supply chains. First, I told you that the profits before the pandemic were amazing, precisely due to this outsourcing model, which is so successful. And I would like to tell you that there is a margin, for improvements, because I just give you an example, because of the crisis, a number of brands have decided to move away from the zero stocks, because they could realize that if suddenly, China is shutting down, Italy is shutting down, they would have needed stocks to feed the markets and to be sure that consumers would have, the goods at the right time. So clearly, they realized that they needed stocks, and they're ready now to invest in storages, stocks again. So they find the margin for that. And I think that they could also find margin to have more sustainable social practices, such as paying a living wage, which, is now, the issue of major campaigns from civil society, but also from the governments, with also international organizations being involved. Clearly, these sustainable social practices could be funded, through a more equal redistribution of growth within global supply chains. And, in the next slide, which I think is the last one, clearly, you need to change the business model. And here you need a number of conditions. First, buyers should learn from this crisis to revise purchasing practices and ensure proper social and environmental sustainability. What is interesting is that I noticed that you have two types of companies these days. A certain number of companies decided to stop their sustainability programs to focus back to their core activity, and others decided, on the contrary, to accelerate on sustainability. But why? Because they realized that the current COVID-19 crisis put the evidence on a number of vulnerabilities on their supply chains, precisely in terms of discrimination issues, precisely in terms of vulnerability in terms of work contracts, in terms of low wages. And this can really have bad reputational effects. Then these changes also need to include order stability, between the brands and suppliers, that would allow for proper planning, timely payment of orders, and full respect for workers' rights. And it's good that many companies these days are working on purchasing prices, on purchasing practices. But clearly, if you want to work seriously on purchasing practices, you need to touch the costing model. And here, I mean, you need to include in your costs the price that you will pay the suppliers for producing your goods. You need to include a certain number of elements like living wages, benefits, severance pays, building safety, and so on. Clearly, social sustainability should somehow be integrated into the contract between the buyers and suppliers. And clearly, there is a need here, I mean, to have governments mobilizing all the resources, to subsidize suppliers and provide wage support to all workers during the crisis. I mean, during the crisis, we could see that governments, from developing countries, emerging countries, were not mobilizing resources, for helping their industries, their workers, as, for example, Western countries, during the COVID-19 crisis in terms of work sharing contracts and, funded unemployment benefits and so on. And then the international community should be mobilized. And I think that it's really good to see that the UN Global Compact these days, for example, has a group on the living wage, precisely to improve wages along global supply chains. And, the timing is perfect. We had yesterday at the ILO a debate on decent work in global supply chains. And the good news is that all the parties, governments, the workers group, the employers group, got together and reached a consensus for progressing on decent work in global supply chains. So they agreed, to have a new report by November on this issue, and to have the ILO, because it's a tripartite institution, to work with the necessary actors along the global supply chain to propose a more decent business model in global supply chains. Thanks a lot. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Very, very interesting presentation, and thanks for keeping us also updated about what's going on at the ILO, about this major issue that needs to be addressed, even should have been addressed before the pandemic. And now with the pandemic, it's even more urgent to look for ways to make the whole global supply chain more based on decent work, as well as other considerations of decency. One question came in, and I wanted to address this immediately. The question to you was, why the global supply chain model why did it lead to non-responsibility problems? And how to rebalance wages and responsibility. Of course, you already mentioned people are talking at the ILO, but maybe there's more to it, and also more to the question for more answers.
Yes, that's a good question, in fact. But you see, it's really inbuilt in the business model of global supply chains that is based on the fact that you outsource production. So it's true that the brands at the beginning felt not responsible because they considered that, the suppliers had to be responsible. It's after a couple of scandals that you could see that, they had to be responsible because they had the lead firms. And being the lead firms, they have to manage their supply chain. And I think that a number of brands have shown that by managing the supply chain in a responsible way is a way to ensure that you will have better and more sustainable conditions at the end of the chain. Having said this is the responsibility of all actors. The local governments also should take responsibility in terms of labor inspection, in terms of minimum wage setting, in terms of collective bargaining institutions, to make sure that wages, working conditions will improve. But having said that, the lead firm has a responsibility. And what has evolved in this debate is the fact that now nobody is putting any doubts on the fact that the lead firms should be responsible. And in fact, this is what is asked from the brands in terms of due diligence in their operations, overseas. because they consider that, they have a responsibility. They fix the prices. They fix the prices to suppliers. So in a way, they decide somehow what will be the margin of suppliers and what will be the conditions for the suppliers to ensure that there will be the payment of a living wage, decent working time, and good working conditions.
Thank you. Leads to an immediate second question from my point of view, which is the competition among the suppliers in the developing countries and the least developed countries. Of course, they try to be, quote, attractive and to try to get the best possible link to the investors, meaning the brands. So how could they internally within their country, or maybe with others who are involved in the same kind of supply chain, how could they agree to minimum standards, which on one hand, they maybe would already be thinking, how could I outcompete the others? How to get a consensus that there should be a minimum and then we compete, so to speak? Or is it open-ended race to the bottom?
Yeah, well, this is a good question, but Raymond, that there is a sort of unbalanced relationship. There is an unbalanced relationship between the lead firms and suppliers because clearly they're not in the same healthy conditions in terms of profitability and so on. And this is also an unbalanced relationship between more developed countries and developing countries. And clearly here, I mean, I can just give you a flavor of the debates that we had at the ILO during the conference on global supply chains in 2016. And clearly there, I mean, developing countries were not that much favorable, I mean, to do anything in terms of global supply chains, because they could see that as a sort of competitiveness. And they didn't want to have any interference from international actors in their local affairs. But you're right. I mean, if you have minimum standards there, I mean, you fix a sort of level playing field, which allows you not to fall below certain standards. But at the same time, it will not resolve the problem of the unbalanced relationship between the actors. And here you need a responsibility from the lead firms and also from developed countries.
Well, I see another question came in regards to mobility. I read off what I see. They thanked for your presentation, and I thank you again. It's a great presentation. Part of the global supply chain is mobility of people, workers, businessmen, and mobility of goods. So the question is about the COVID has shown the weaknesses and the unsustainability of mobility. How can we address that, especially in the developing world, and bringing down mobility-based trade infrastructure barriers? So it's a bit about mobility of the workers. That's my interpretation of the question. But how do you, what do you see can be said an answer to this question about mobility of the workers?
Yeah, we would need another conference just on that, but but clearly, I mean, yeah, global supply chain is about clearly mobility of goods, mobility of capital, and also, sort of mobility of workers, because clearly, if you look at, global supply chains, they led, for example, to internal mobility. And, if I take the example of Ethiopia, for example, a certain number of workers went, from rural areas to, those industrial districts. So this changed quite a lot, and this internal mobility is not always a bad thing. In this case, it allowed, young generations not to be confined in agricultural production, but also to move towards those industrial districts. Then, I mean, there is a responsibility also there, I mean, to provide some career progression also to those young generations. So it's another story. So, but yes, global supply chains can have an impact on internal mobility, and it could also have an impact on external mobility, of course. But you have pros and cons. I mean, I think that, barriers, I mean, to mobility is not, the flavor of the day. I mean, we are in the globalization process. So the only problem is to try to develop what should be the institutions, what should be the standards to allow, I mean, to have conditions that are sometimes, not too unbalanced, between regions, between countries, and so on. So I think that it's not really barriers to mobility that we need, but it's more providing the right institutions standards to ensure that there will be no negative effects, I mean, to this trade and workers' mobility.
Yeah, I can agree with you. We've been doing a study on fisheries, and in particularly in the Southeast Asia region, some of the people who are taken on board, it's considered almost the last form of slavery, because they're coming from other countries. They're put to work with a minimum safety conditions. So it also means safety south, that they should among themselves agree on minimum labor standards and labor protection, in addition to the brands, of course. I think we're reaching the end of this presentation and the time that we could listen to you. But Daniel, I agree with you. There is plenty that could be turned into a next webinar. So first of all, I'd like to thank you very much for taking time to talk to us and to the participants who are spread around the globe. And we wish you, of course, also a lot of very fruitful, beneficial negotiations or just informal exchanges at the ILO at the present time. And see you hopefully soon, maybe ideally, of course, again in person.
Sure, I hope so. Thanks a lot,
Okay.
and good luck to all of you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Now this leads us to our next speaker. Let me get my chart up again. Can you see it? Yeah. Can people see my chart?
No.
Uh-huh. No. Okay. Let me try it with share.
Now it's coming.
Now it's coming? Okay, very good. So our next speaker will address a very, very important topic. And I already made allusions to it in my short introduction. And that is, what about the youth, the young people, the millions of young people who are without jobs or hope to find some form of decent job? How to get the voices heard of the young people. And we have Joshua Alade from Nigeria. He is a coach, positive youth development coach, as well as a sustainability consultant. And he works on education and decent work for young people and women. So talking about the national voluntary reviews, he is very much involved in Nigeria as a project coordinator of the Nigerian Youth SDG Network. And we're looking forward to hearing more about what this network is all about. It's a coalition, as he says, and about youth-led focus on civil society organizations to drive accountability and local advocacy into the SDGs implementation. In 2020, Joshua worked with the United Nations Department for Economic and Social Affairs, UNENDESA, and the ILO to design the implementation of the Nigeria Youth Employment Action Plan. Joshua, we look forward to hearing from you and to find out more what this all means. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Raymond, and I'm excited to be here. So I'll be sharing my screen right now. Let me know if you can see my screen.
It's coming. Now you just have to enlarge it.
Yeah, sure, I'll do that. Is it enlarged now?
No, you could enlarge it. Yeah, now it's good.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Raymond, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone everywhere. I hope you are doing fine. And this current pandemic has not really changed your life, because it has changed my life. Before the pandemic, I used to work in a very big complex. But right now, since March 2020, I've been working from home because I lost my job then. So I'm a perfect person to talk about to build better futures, experiences of youth employment. As from my presentation, I work with the Nigerian Youth Sustainable Development Goals Network. It's a coalition of youth-led civil society organizations localizing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in Nigeria. And this coalition is made up of about 300 plus youth civil society organizations. August will make us 4 years since we've been in existence, and we've been privileged enough to work with a lot of organizations from the UN in Nigeria to the ILO to UNDESA to the Federal Ministry of Youth and Sports, and then the Office of the President on Sustainable Development Goals in Nigeria. So I'll be sharing my experience on how we can build better futures with young people. And the first thing I really want us to look at very well is the youth opportunity. According to the ILO, the World Bank itself, we have more than 1.5 billion young people under the age of 24 globally. And if you look at it, it's something that is being termed the demographic dividend. Like, how can we be able to harness this population of young people? This is the youngest the world has ever been, and this is the youngest the world will ever be. And looking forward at the growing trend in the green economy, looking at how looking at digitalization itself and how it has been able to like support employment for young people. And another part is looking at how young people have been able to lead the path of digital inclusion itself. In Nigeria, where I am based, I'll tell you something about the fact that I think this year I've only been to the bank once, and that's because of the high proliferation of digital banks in Nigeria. So you do not have to go into the banking halls anymore. You can, all you just need to do is have your smartphone, and then you can be able to make transactions online. And this has been led by young people. And another thing I'll talk about the youth opportunity is the fight by young people to really bring an end to climate change, how young people have led a lot of movement globally to make sure that we do not just end climate change, but we also attain or achieve the sustainable development goals. And the role that social media and the internet has really played in ensuring that young people everywhere are connected. So we are in a time whereby there's a lot of advancement when it comes to opportunities for young people. We're in a time whereby there's a lot of connections for young people when it comes to being able to access decent work. But now the question is, what are the challenges? What is stopping young people from accessing decent work? Why is it that we have so much opportunities around us, but yet we have young people who are unemployed? Just last week in Nigeria, the National Bureau of Statistics, they came up with a report that 1 in 3 Nigerians is unemployed. That's to tell you that just like 33.3% of Nigerians are underemployed. So talking about underemployed, this was before the pandemic itself. So now with the pandemic, so we are talking about looking at a scale of maybe ×2 or ×3 of people who are underemployed, and a large percentage of these people are young people under the age of 30. So how can we be able to harness, or how can we be able to ensure that young people were able to build back better with them, thinking about the future itself? Now, one of the first things we need to look at the challenge in enabling youth employment and accessing decent work. last year, during at the peak of the pandemic itself, my organization worked with the Federal Ministry of Youth and Sports in Nigeria, worked with the ILO and UNDESA to really understand what's the barrier to young people attaining decent work. And when we launched out this survey, we had about 212,000 young Nigerians who took this survey over a period of 6 weeks. And one of the things that really came out about was around policy coherence. Like the policies that we have right now are not really taking into perspective the dynamic demands of the changes in the workforce itself. So, for instance, I'll tell you, in my country, there's this policy that focuses a lot on agriculture itself, saying because we have a large youth population, so young people should actually embrace agriculture. Fine, it's a nice policy, but it is not in line with what is really happening in today's dynamic world. So right now we're talking about the green economy, we're talking about digitalization, and we're talking about the fact that young people need to be able to have the right education that they will need to be able to attain the work that they deserve, and also talking about the infrastructural gap also. So in the policies that we have right now, they are not enough to be able to guarantee decent work for young people. And if we're talking about policy itself, but let's look at education, for instance. In my country, right before the pandemic started, that I'm talking about Nigeria itself, right before the pandemic started, universities were on strike a year before the pandemic itself. So it was just sometimes in January 2021 that universities resumed back. And what was their agitation? University lecturers were talking about the need that they want better pay, and the government was not ready to be able to provide them with the better pay that they are asking for. So what are we saying? We've had young people who have lost 2 years of their education due to the fact that university lecturers are on strike. So now these students have to go back into school and prepare for examinations after losing 2 years of school. And another thing we have to talk about is the policies around vocational skills training. We are in a time whereby skills is essential, but we do not even have the right curriculum that will be able to ensure that young people are able to have the right skills that they will need to be able to do well in the world of work. So coming back to the survey itself that we had last year was around the fact that a lot of young people are in the informal economy, but there's not enough resources to support young people in the informal economy. So I'll tell you that in a country like Nigeria, if one in every 3 young person you meet works probably in a private sector organization, 2 in 3 of all of these young people own their own businesses, but there's not enough financing gap to be able to support them. And this is why young people are saying, how is it possible that the government can be able to maybe not totally formalize, but be able to provide a means of identifying young people who are in the informal economy to support them. And the other thing, challenges, is actually addressing the issue of youth skills mismatch. So one of the things you would realize that because of how education has become very important today, you find out that young people who do not even have university education are actually struggling to be able to get jobs that is meant for them, because these jobs are going out for people who are graduates or people who are even master's graduates, people who are university graduates. So there's a lot. You find someone who is in a particular position, and you know that with this person's degree, with this person's educational qualification, you are not supposed to be filling up this gap. You are not supposed to be having this job, but because jobs are not available, so we're having a lot of skills mismatches. And these are some of the gaps that were being identified by the young people during the survey that we had in last year. So now, what do we need to do? I'll really say something that, yes, the government is trying, but it is not doing enough. And talking about the not doing enough is looking at how can we ensure accountability and transparency in policies that addresses decent work for youth. And I'll give you an example of something that is happening in Nigeria. Just last year, the the government of Nigeria released a new kind of intervention for young people that is called the Nigerian Youth Investment Fund. So this is a $200 million fund that will, over the next 3 years, that young people, whether in the that have registered business, can be able to apply for loans that are single digits and be able to get them to be able to boost their business processes. This is really good, but when you look at it in the long run, most young people are saying the fact that they do not feel that they will be able to get this loan, as you need a lot of connections, or you need to know someone in government to be able to access it. So when it comes to policies, it needs to be transparent, and there also has to be accountability when it comes to that also. And another thing that is happening right now is there's this intervention by the government in respect to supporting women in the markets and young people who work in the field, and provides them with a seed grant of less than $20. And then young people are saying, what can $20 actually do for my business? It's not enough. So rather than $20 for each for 1 million young people, can you bring down this money down and make it probably $5,000 for 10,000 young people? That way you are able to scale up the project. That way you are able to account to say, yes, that we are making impact and we can be that are verifiable. And another thing that we need to overcome is investment in infrastructure. Currently, I am speaking with you, and I am using a battery that has been charged for the past 2 days because I do not have power. So a lot of businesses in Nigeria actually have to depend on solar panels, or they have to depend on diesel power generators to be able to make sure that their businesses work. And so it means that most of the profits that they are going to actually make, sometimes they have to make sure that they spend all of these things in buying fuel for their generators. So at the end of the day, they do not have enough money to take back home, and then getting access to decent work is actually very difficult. So the government needs to invest a lot in infrastructure, needs to make sure that there's power available. We all know that power is the engine room for industry. So if industries do not have power, it will be very difficult for young people to be able to get into decent jobs with that. And another thing is actually digital transformation. So in my country, there's a new wave of young people going into technology. Just 2 weeks ago, Nigeria had, I would say Africa had the first indigenous unicorn called Flutterwave. Flutterwave is a payment gateway, and this was started by a young person who is under 30 without any support from the government. So digital transformation is actually creating a new method for young people to get into decent work. So now what government needs to actually do is to create enabling environment for young people that have businesses to be able to scale up. And then there's a need for us to look at the green economy itself. Nigerians right now, young people are very focused on social entrepreneurship. So you have a lot of young people who are going into recycling, who are going into renewable energy to be able to create decent work. So doing what the government now needs to do is to support them. And then another part is investment in this in the service industry, because the service industry, whether we are talking about agriculture, the service industry itself, the agricultural value chain holds a lot of potential for young people to be able to attain decent work. So with the government investing in that value chain, will make it possible for young people to be able to overcome the challenges when it comes to decent work itself. And another thing that the COVID-19 pandemic made us to understand is the need for job safety net for young people. I'll tell you that the minimum wage for Nigeria is actually less than $100 USD per month. So if you look at it very well, and for most people who, because you have a country whereby a large proportion of your citizens are in the informal sector, so it means that if they do not go out in a day, they might not be able to have food to eat. So it's very important that the government is able to ensure work safety net for young people. How can you ensure that even when I am out of job, I am able to get probably a living wage to be able to survive. And that's where, when a young person knows that, okay, I'm liable to a living wage to be able to survive, he or she can look up to the internet to say, how can I develop my skills better, to be able to globally compete with other people in the world. Another thing we actually have to also look at is the issue of inequalities, which the COVID-19 pandemic has really made us to see. During the survey that we held, a lot of the participants were people who did not have a university degrees, and one of the things they talked about was the fact that they feel that in the place of work, there are inequalities for them. They feel that for once that because you, as someone who does not have a university degree, you really do not know how to place a premium on your time. So if you apply for a job role and whatever you are being paid, that's what you get. So you don't have to, you are not able to probably guide yourself. So you don't have like a union that protects your rights as a young worker. So this is something that we need to look into as going forward when we are building back better after the COVID-19 pandemic itself. So what are the lessons to be learned from Nigeria and for other countries? So one of the things I would say is that we need to understand that government alone cannot create jobs. The jobs, for instance, Nigeria is highly dependent on petroleum. And when you look at it itself, the petroleum industry in Nigeria only provides jobs for about 0.001% of the Nigerian population. So there's a lot of opportunities in the green economy. There's a lot of opportunity in the digital world. There's a lot of things that the government needs to look at to say, how can we invite the private sector and how can we put in more funding into other parts of the economy that will ensure that we can be able to create jobs. And a cheap example is looking at what has happened with the tiger economy itself. Currently, Nigeria has banned import, trying to rely a lot on exports. But in a country whereby you do not have the infrastructure to be able to export, you need importation to be able to cushion the effect of the poverty that is happening in the land. Currently, the inflation rate in Nigeria is as high as 19%. So it means that a lot of people are suffering because government right now has banned importation and thinking of leveraging on exportation. But if you bear with me, one of the things we are saying, one of the lessons we have to understand is that the greatest potential that Nigeria has right now is our young people. And when I say young people, we're talking about 80 million young people. And if Nigeria is able to invest in our young people, those young people would be the one to provide the forex, the foreign exchange that we need to galvanize our economy after the effect of this pandemic itself. And then I've talked about a lot around investment in digital transformation to create jobs. Just this week, a digital bank in Nigeria was able to raise about $20 million. This is a bank without any infrastructure. They do not have infrastructure anywhere. It's an online bank. So and then they are employing a lot of people. So if the government investing in digital transformation would be able to create jobs for young people. Another thing is social entrepreneurship. So I have a lot of my friends and I as an individual who are vested in social entrepreneurship. And as you remember, UNDESA released a report last year, the World Youth Report, talking about the importance of social entrepreneurship itself. We have young people today who are passionate about giving back to the society. So one of the best ways to be able to get them is that they do not just want to transform their lives alone. They also want to transform the lives of people in their community. They want to look out for a problem and fix it. And while fixing the problem, they want to earn wage from that. So investment in social entrepreneurship is really very important. And finally, it's talking around ensuring that young people are the center of policy formulation and implementation. And I'll give a very good instance when we talk about the formation of the Nigerian Youth Employment Action Plan. So for me as an individual, I am very curious. And coming from a very poor background, I know how much having access to decent work has been able to transform my life, not just transforming my life, but making it possible for me and my friends to be able to have like the kind of life that we want, not the best, but something that is above average. And one of the things I found out was that I discovered Nigeria actually has a like Nigeria has a youth employment action plan that has been on since 2010, but nobody has done anything about it. And I got curious and I started asking questions, and that was how, from asking questions, my organization was nominated by UNDESA to carry out a survey to understand what's really stopping young people from accessing decent work, and how do young people feel that the government can support them to build back better after COVID-19 pandemic. And when we're done with the survey itself, we organized youth labs with the support of UNDESA and ILO across the 36 states of Nigeria, having 800 young people present in all of these youth labs. And they coming together, we're able to create a strategy towards the implementation of the Nigerian Youth Employment Action Plan. I'm happy to tell everybody on this call right now that the Nigerian Youth Employment Action Plan is actually in the 2021 national budget of Nigeria. So it's the first time ever that we're having an action plan that is being spearheaded by young people with support from the Federal Ministry of Youth and Sports, looking at education, looking at entrepreneurship, looking at employment, looking at equality and rights for young people. Because looking at it very well, Nigeria has an awesome national youth policy, but one of the things that is lacking is how can we implement, how can we ensure that young people is at the center of every one of these things. And that's something that I and my colleagues have been able to do so far. Thank you.
Joshua, thank you very much for a very moving presentation and very encouraging also to listen to you and to imagine of, as you said, the millions of people of your age in Nigeria who are in a similar situation, if many of them feel the same way and are eager to improve the situation. I think that is a good promise for the future. I took note of some of the figures that you gave, one also pertaining to the high amount of unemployment, which is not only a youth problem, but as you said, before even the pandemic, it was 33%. Maybe now with the COVID, it could be 50%. With an informal economy, it's extremely difficult to shape this into something that's sustainable and not a one day off short transaction. I was just wondering, one thing I didn't hear you mention, a lot of great ideas, but what about, working together as a form of cooperative? Has that occurred at all, or is everybody, you didn't say it that way, but I got to imagine the image that everybody is waiting for the government to do something, which they should. I mean, that's why they're a government. They should initiate meaningful policies that will be for the benefit of its citizens. But besides waiting for the government, it's not the same comparable situation, but Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, they were school leavers. They didn't finish education. So from an educational qualification background, they didn't qualify, but they were entrepreneurs, and they got into the digital economy that is now also growing in Nigeria. How is it, would it be possible that more of the young come together and create even a small enterprise or a small cooperative to start to take things into your own hands? What do you think? I don't hear you. Maybe you're muted. Joshua, I think you're muted. I don't hear you. Can you talk?
All right, please, can you repeat your question?
Okay. All right.
It's raining here, so I'm having issues with my network.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Now I hear you.
Yeah. All right.
So did you?
Can you ask the question again?
Okay, just very briefly, I'm aware of time, and actually the next speaker could be of great interest to you just to hear what's happening in another country, such as Italy, when it comes to regional development. In your region and in your environment, there are other young people who are out of a job or looking for meaningful, decent work. Why not do something together? Do you have to wait for the government to provide opportunities? Now I think you lost it again, but we're out of contact. Can you hear me? Joshua? I think we're losing Joshua.
Yeah. Perhaps, I think it was a great presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think he probably has some difficulties because of the energy.
I see him coming back. Joshua? Hello? Joshua? Well, I think maybe Joshua, just stay with this session, and maybe at the end of the next speaker's presentation, there's time for you to come back. Are you hearing me again? No.
No.
Okay, so let's move on, and we move to the third speaker.
Yes,
and,
I'm back. It's raining, so I had to change my internet source. I can hear you.
Okay. Okay. Did you hear my question? Joshua, I just
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? But we have to move on. Stay connected, and at the end of the next presenter's presentation, maybe there's time for you to reconnect.
Thank you. Tell me your question again.
The link is, yeah, I have to close. Stay on, and maybe
yes, I can hear you.
The next presentation, there's still time to connect and to discuss. But I have to move on. I'm sorry, but I know I can understand that connection problems makes it difficult for you to stay connected.
All right. So thank you.
Sure. All right. Thanks for your great presentation. All right. Now we move on to the next speaker. But do you hear me? Is everything connected? Gianluca, do you hear me?
Can hear you. Yes.
Oh, very definitely. Good. Okay, hi. So to everybody, our third and last speaker is
all right. Thank you.
Is Dr. Gianluca Salvatore. He is the Secretary General.
You're welcome.
Yeah, he's the Secretary General of the Fondazione Italia Sociale, which was established in 2016 by the Italian government. He has been involved since 2009 with EURISE, that's the European Research Institute on Cooperatives and Social Enterprises. Now, Gianluca, just briefly, before with the speaker from Nigeria, I don't know whether you heard the end of his presentation. One of the issues that was about youth unemployment, and I think maybe there's something you could also say about what Italy is doing, especially also to cooperatives, to provide opportunities for the young to get into the economy. Gianluca Salvatore is the General Secretary of EURISE, and he's also the member of CESE's European Commission Expert Group on the Social Economy, and also with a UN Task Force on Social and Solidarity Economy. Previously, he devoted himself to research and innovation as a manager of a foundation called Bruno Kessler, and he is the Counselor for Research and Innovation of a province in Italy. It's the autonomous province of Trento, which is in northern Italy towards the mountain areas, and is elected as founder and president of Broghetto Manifattura, which is another area also in northern Italy. There's much more to say, but in the interest of time, and we want to hear from you, not from me, but I wanted to present you. And Gianluca, go ahead, take the floor.
Thank you, Raymond. It's a pleasure to meet you again, Licia as well. Let me share my screen so that I can start with my presentation, and you will see.
Okay.
Okay. Apparently, you can see. Yeah. Okay. So as you was mentioning, I'm talking to you from an Italian region. So we are in Europe, in the northeast of Italy, you see, at the border with Austria. And I want to underline two key elements of this location. One is that from the economic point of view, we are talking of a mountain region. And a mountain region is naturally disadvantaged in Europe, is less served in terms of transportation, less served in terms of proximity to large areas, urban areas, and so on. So this is a first, let's say, handicap. Furthermore, this is a border region. And a border region has some identity problem in terms of belonging, cultural, social belonging. Just remember that Trentino region, this area, in the last 2 centuries, so 200 years, went through 4 main phases of its history. First was completely autonomous, was a kind of state, a micro-state during more than 7 or 8 centuries, then become a part of the kingdom of Italy. Then after a war was transferred to the Austrian Empire for 1 century, and finally, since 1918, so something more 1 century, back to the Italian Republic with a semi-autonomous form. And this is quite strange for an Italian region to have shuttled back and forth 2 countries, Italy and Austria. This means that in the past, especially in the 19th century, Trentino was really a periphery, was a place far from everywhere, far from Rome, the capital city of Italy, far from Vienna, the capital city of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and was the population was Italian speaking. And for more than 1 century, this Italian-speaking population was a minority within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So socially disadvantaged, I would say. So it was a marginal, mountainous region characterized by a rural subsistence economy. And what happened in the second half of the 19th century is that thousands of farmers, thousands of people emigrated from Trentino. They left their villages to seek their fortune abroad. Someone in Europe, but many of them in the Americas, North and South Americas, where they expected to find more opportunities. Entire valleys, entire villages were emptied out and went abroad. In 1918, when the Trentino came back to Italy, the whole region, the entire region, lost the traditional Austro-Hungarian market. So again, another crisis, an economic crisis. after a social crisis. So this is just to introduce the next point, that is the economic performance today, 1 century after those events. You can see that the per capita GDP in Europe or of this region is higher, much higher than the per capita GDP of the average of Italy and even the average of the European Union. So it's more than 10,000 euro higher than the other two average. So what happened in between? Another information is that wealth is more distributed than on average in other countries. You can see this table that represents the relationship between performance and equity in terms of income distribution and Gini index. And Trento is much, better performing than many other countries in Europe and across the world, and also better than in the rest of Italy in terms of balancing economic performance and social equity, social justice, I would say. So which are the historical steps that brought the Trentino from being one of the poorest regions in Italy and in Europe to be now one of the richest and wealthier regions in Europe? Well, the social economy played an essential role, and especially the cooperative economy. Here you see the timetable representing the main steps in the last part of the 19th century, when there was that large migration, people leaving Trentino going to Americas. At the same time, the people that decide to stay and not to leave, they created a system, a cooperative system, very dense and very articulated. First, creating consumer cooperatives and cooperative banks, then creating a bunch of agriculture cooperatives immediately after, and then establishing coordination among all those organizations with the first Trentino Federation of Cooperatives, still alive today, and then creating a second-level consortium of banks, of consumer cooperatives, or any kind of cooperative organizations. So what is worth to notice, to underline, is that the way to exit from poverty from Trentino started with an investment in terms of cooperative model. The role of rural banks was particularly important because they were community-based. They were institutions working on the assumption that all those small organizations, all those small cooperatives, they would not, could not play an important role without an investment of capitals. But the single members of those cooperatives were not able to invest capitals because they hadn't any capital. So the local community created the shared financial institutions, community financial institutions, in order to overcome this lack of individual financial instruments. And this has been a key element in building all the system. The objectives of this investment in the cooperative model were, of course, trying to develop the territory, to develop the places being marginal, offsetting the distance from large markets, and especially reacting to the loss of the northern markets when Trentino was part of the empire. joining forces and making a qualitative leap in production and marketing methods, compensating the local weaknesses, creating a structural movement with a unified representation. Today, the Trentino region is one of the most dense region from the cooperative point of view in Europe. We have 500,000 inhabitants and more than 270,000 cooperative members. So 1 out 2 people in this region is member of cooperative. And the size of the cooperative economy is the largest. It's 14% of the employment, 15% of gross domestic product. So it's a giant within the economic area. This system is a system that has 2 features that I would like to point out. The first is that is largely diffused democratic representation. We do have all those members organized through more than 500 cooperatives, and every cooperative has its own board. It means that the old system, the Trentino system, has more than 5,100 board members. So the stake, the voice in deciding policies, in taking decisions, in choosing the strategy is spread among many people. Is really, diffused across all the territory. And another aspect is that all this system is based on consortia. So small cooperatives gather together in order to comply with the challenges coming from the market. So we have 4 main consortia in the credit, in the agriculture, in the consumer, and in the labor and social housing and social services. I can just give you a very quick outlook on the main one. The agriculture is the 100%. The 90% of the market share is organized through cooperatives, and the 100% of the production of those cooperatives goes to the cooperative system. So it's a very blocked, a very compact system. You are not allowed to deliver your product to others different from the cooperative system. So this is a strength. You have to know that the farmers in Trentino, they have very small plots. They are owner of less than 1 acre or 2 acres. So they are obliged, in order to overcome the obstacles in the access to the market, they are obliged to work together. The same for the credit. 65% of market share is in the cooperative credit. In the consumer sector, 194 villages out of 217, so almost all the small villages in Trentino, they have just 1 cooperative shop. They are small villages with just 1 shop. And of course, that shop is a reference for all the community, providing any kind of services, not only selling food, but also providing different kind of services to the local population. And then we have a large sector in the social services. The social cooperatives have been born in Trentino region. This was one of the regions where the social cooperatives started 30, 40 years ago. So this was just to give you a general idea. And here you see an interesting chart giving you, in the last years, 5 years, 8 years, the trend of the employment compared to the Italian trends. You see in blue the share of the local, the number of employees in terms of annual average in Trentino, the blue one, compared to the cooperative sector in Italy, the red one, compared to the other private for-profit companies in Trentino and in Italy. As you can see, this system has reacted very well to all the different crises that we experienced in the last 80 years. So keeping, consolidating, defending the employment of a large share of the local labor market. I want to point out a few points, a few elements, just to close my presentation, giving you a sense of the main findings of this case, the Trentino case. The first one was, this experience has its own roots in a response, in a reaction to a critical frayed situation across a long history that has showed the ability to adapt to new social needs in a continuous change, working mainly on local resources, so intrinsically linked to local development. So it's just more than economic development. It's social, cultural, and economic development together. And I want to point out this fourth element, connecting this economic and social structure to an institutional structure, because the Trentino region was granted after the Second World War a special autonomy, because this identity that was shared between Italy and Austria. The Trentino province is an autonomous province. It means that was assigned by constitutional law an extraordinary legislative and administrative autonomy. So the Trentino power has its own parliament and its own government at local level. So we do elect our parliament. And this parliament and this government, they have a large range of powers. What I want to underline is that the Trentino region would not have become what is today if this institutional framework that is particular, that in Italy, just two provinces have the same power, the Trentino one and the Bolzano one. So this institutional framework, established by the Statute of the Autonomy, had not found, was based on social and cultural substrate, giving power, giving substance to the practice of the self-government. So the success of the institutional autonomy, the political autonomy, depended crucially on the existence of a texture formed by a cooperative culture. I want to underline this intertwining relationship between the institutional and the economic and social elements. Finally, still today, the economic impact of the cooperative movement in Trentino is important in terms of reducing market failures and strengthening the competitiveness of markets for small organizations like those cooperatives based in a mountain region. They are working hard on keeping the production of goods and services close to the needs of people, especially underserved people in mountain areas, with a long-term perspective of growth and an idea of fair distribution of income. And from the social point of view, these same systems is able to address social problems affecting local communities strongly, with strong roots in a collective awareness. So in a local social capital, and solving problems that would be otherwise in charge of the public sector. So having such a developed cooperative system is able to counterbalance the weaknesses of the public powers that in Italy, as you maybe know, have not always been able to give answers to the social needs, because we are a quite weak state with a long tradition of weak powers. And all this, of course, involving the most disadvantaged people. That is the feature, the characteristic feature of the cooperative system. So just in a nutshell, these are the main elements I wanted to transmit to you in terms of a case study established a long time ago in Trentino, but still alive and still producing innovation, like, for instance, institutions like EURIXA, my own research center, that is based in Trento, and that was created, established 10, 15 years ago by the cooperative movement, by the local university, and by the local authority, the local province. So as an example of this triangle of different forces that are working on the development of a marginalized region. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Gianluca, for such an interesting historical presentation, and also, of course, a very contemporary topic, what to do and how to organize our economy and society. When I saw the pictures of the people leaving the region to migrate to, North and South America, in my country, in Switzerland, we had a very similar situation. People out of hardship, sometimes even because of famine, had to migrate. So they were economic migrants. And it's good sometimes to remember that was also the case in our part of the world, not only now in the Africa and in other countries, Central Asia, where people have to leave because they can't survive. But I'd like to come back also and ask you a question, immediate follow-on question. After all, the context are the SDGs. And today it's SDG 8. We had before you a young gentleman from Nigeria, Joshua, who is representing a group of youth, and they're trying to organize themselves, in a way you could say, to get jobs or to be part of the economy. And we're talking about enormous numbers. We're talking about 80 million people who are looking for jobs, the informal economy, which we also had in Europe in the past, an informal economy. So what would be your advice that when we talk about how to help others, it's partnership, it's SDG 17. If I can imagine that your region, with everything that the region was able to develop, there's a lot of know-how that could be shared to help others in other parts of the world. But where to begin? It's like the chicken and the egg issue. Is it because you already have good institutions that the economy could become a very prosperous cooperative economy? Or is it because there's a cooperative movement and a lot of the market is dealt with by cooperatives, that the institutions reflect the cooperative side? But where to begin if you don't have either a good cooperative economy, nor maybe an institution that reflects and responds to its citizens? Sorry
Yeah,
for being a bit long.
No. I mean, I appreciate a lot your reflection. Definitely, in the Trentino case, institutions came later. So first the society and then the institutions. So the story began with the activation, the self-activation by common citizens deciding that they needed an alternative to the migration. So they had a choice, leaving for going abroad or trying to pull together resources. And some of them decided to create social institutions like cooperatives in order to pull together resources. There were leaders, cultural leaders, people who spread the idea and create the cultural conditions. And then they didn't wait for the intervention from top down. They didn't wait from any intervention from the state. At that time, the state was too far and was looking somewhere else. So they had to use all the resources available at local level. And this means that we had a double path. from one side, the economic path in creating economic institutions, and on the other side, the cultural path in creating the consciousness, the awareness, in creating the training, the education for people. In every village, we had, a priest, or let's say someone more educated, that was trying to transfer to all the population of the village the idea of the cooperation. So a diffusion of cultural values spread across all territory. And this was the base. You mentioned another aspect. What is doing today the Trentino for other countries? Well, because of this history, Trentino region is in Italy one of the regions most involved in cooperation projects with less developed, let's say, countries. Trentino is plenty. When I say Trentino, I mean the province, so the political powers, but also the cooperative system, and also the volunteering associations. There are plenty of projects in South America, in Africa, in Asia, in many countries, where they provide some, I would say, help or suggestions or transfer of knowledge in order to adapt the cooperative model to different contexts, in order to stimulate other stories like the Trentino ones. So the Trentino Federation is open to collaborations. Every week, every month, you have delegations coming from everywhere in the world, trying to connect to the Trentino cooperative system, other experiences, and create exchanges of knowledge in order to improve the cooperative model across the globe. So I would say this is one of the missions of the cooperative system in Trentino today.
Great. Wonderful. Well, I see that Joshua is back. He had some connection difficulties. Joshua, can you hear us? You have to unmute.
Yes, I can hear you.
Maybe you heard what was being said and the presentation just before by Gianluca Salvatore. Maybe out of your situation representing the youth in Nigeria, maybe you have a question to Gianluca.
Okay, so I really don't have a question, but what I just want to ask is, how do you think that young people can maybe with what's happening right now with the pandemic itself, how do you think that we can get stronger? How do you think we can work with the local government authorities to probably be able to build resilience following the impact of this pandemic, and with respect to having jobs too?
Okay, so that wasn't the question. Okay, all right. What would be your answer to this?
I would say, we all, it's not just about Nigeria, it's about Italy, my country, and any other country. We need to create stronger networks of brains, of people, educated people that are keen, that are engaged in change, that have a perspective, that have a vision, people that have an engagement. So I believe that for young people, what is important is to feel that they are not alone. They can collect energies mutually, creating network and educate themselves. If they cannot access to formal education, they can educate themselves, grasping contents in broader networks, with alliance with other people or other institutions across the world. Research centers like mine, ERICSA, for instance, is open to any kind of collaboration in order to create such dialogues among people in order to create those networks. I believe that, working on contents, working on brains, is priority number one in order to create awareness and visions for transformation.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for your response. And I want to check whether there are some chat questions that came in. I see one. Gianluca, how do you assess the role of trust in the region, in your region, for the formation of cooperatives? How do you get people to trust each other and to set up a cooperative?
Yeah, it's a question of the chicken and the egg. I mean, it's quite evident that in some areas, like mountain areas, when you have a survival economy, the trust is a basic need. I mean, all the natural elements around you push in the direction to develop trust, because alone you cannot survive in a difficult environment. So there is a natural component, I would say, in the Trentino case, pushing people towards a more effective, a stronger sense of trust. This is not the case in other Italian regions. For instance, in south and southern regions in Italy, you have less trust and less cooperative movement. So the two things goes together. I mean, they are intertwined. So I would say that I have not an answer. Trust is something that must be, you have to take care in order to increase the trust among people. It's not something that comes out of the blue from nothing. So it has to do with the condition of the context and the ability to take care of those conditions.
Okay. The question was put to you by Kostadin Kolarov from Bulgaria. Of course, trust can more easily be lost than regained. It's a big topic. But you have a second question from Didra Koy, and she asks, do you think a cooperative model could be applied to an inner city, in an urban context, and which does not have an agricultural background? What conditions would be necessary to have a successful cooperative in a city?
Yeah. I mean, I talked to you about a single case, a specific case, the Trentino one, where the economy was based on agriculture. But in Italy and in other parts of Europe, we have also other stories based on urban context. For instance, in Italy, there is another region called Emilia-Romagna. Emilia-Romagna is the Bologna's region. Maybe you know the city of Bologna. So the city, the area around Bologna is completely different from Trentino. Is not a mountain region, is on the contrary a flat land, and with a long tradition of mechanical industry. So the workers are, I mean, the members of cooperatives are not farmers, are workers. So there are plenty of workers cooperatives. So another the mechanism is the same, the conditions are different, but the mechanism, so organizing forms of self-management in order to increase the capacity of negotiating towards stronger powers is exactly the same mechanism that you can find in a mechanical factory close to Bologna, where you react in front of different challenges. And we are now in the middle in Italy of a new phenomenon that is quite interesting. The birth, since let's say 10, 12 years, of what we call community cooperatives in disadvantaged areas, also in urban disadvantaged areas, peripheral areas. where you have disadvantaged people, I mean, migrants or people that have been expulsed by the labor market. So you have, again, the cooperative model functioning in a different context. In that case, an urban context, but from the point of view of the social disadvantage.
This is very interesting. I didn't know about that. And I hope the lessons learned and how to set up a successful community cooperative could be very, very relevant for many countries and many parts of regions of the world. Coming back to the SDGs, and you were not there when I made a few introductory comments. Just wanted to say, to highlight the basic principle understanding of the 2030 agenda is that the three dimensions are linked. They're they're indivisible. That is sustainable environment, sustainable society, and sustainable economy. Now, to the sustainable economy, not much has been said so far, other than you could say, be decent or observe decency when you're an employer, or workers could ask for decent jobs, which is absolutely understandable and absolutely needed. But from a creation of enterprises or of just being a supplier, producer, there's not much has been yet said how that could be done in a way that it wouldn't. I'm not talking about an opportunistic fly-by-night operation which disappears the next day, so to speak, but something which lasts, which will have a foundation, producing goods, selling goods, and at the same time take care of the people that are part of this enterprise. So the question would be, if you take a cooperative further from being a small agricultural cooperative or a small urban cooperative, do you know of examples where a cooperative becomes much bigger or might even go into a sort of supply chain arrangement across the world, as was the topic of the presentation from Daniel, who works at the ILO and looks at the conditions of supply chains. But I'm just wondering, just from a size point of view, are some of the cooperatives in Trento big in the sense that they also have subsidiaries, or that they even maybe relate to non-cooperatives as being part of their market functioning?
Yeah, two answers. The first is more general. As EURIXA, since 10 years, we take care of an instrument that is called World Cooperative Monitor on behalf World Cooperative Monitor on behalf of the International Cooperative Alliance. And the idea of the monitor is exactly to demonstrate that the cooperative model can be adapted also to large size.
Okay.
So in that monitor, you will find the first 300 cooperatives across the world in terms of size, in terms of volume, in terms of turnover, in terms of employees, to demonstrate the cooperative model has no boundaries in terms of size. You can have also very large cooperatives acting, I don't know, for instance, in India, the most large provider of fertilizers is a cooperative with million of members. So I invite you to have a look to the monitor on our website, because the monitor has also some pieces of analysis of why and how this model can be applied to a larger scale. In terms of Trentino region, and this is the second part of my answer, we had exactly the same phenomenon. So small cooperatives with 3 levels of organizations. The single cooperative at grassroots level. Then a first level of consortium connecting all the cooperatives of a single, let's say, valley or large area. And then a third level that is a specific organization that can also be non-cooperative, but is owned by cooperatives. So, that is specialized, for instance, in marketing. I give you an example. We have a very large sector in the wine production. Good wine, I would say. This was not the case 20 or 30 years ago, because the cultivation of the grape in Trentino is quite recent. It was a decision of the cooperative model. The cooperative movement decided to invest in grapes in order to enter into the wine market, because it was a rich market, compatible with the mountainous agriculture. So the cooperatives converted a lot of different agricultural plots to the grape cultivation. Then they create this pyramid, so this system, 3-level system, and on the top there is an organization marketing the wine, the cooperative wine, abroad for all the system. And today, the 70% of all the wine produced in Trentino is exported. And 60% goes to United States through just one channel, a single marketing channel that is organized as a profit company owned by cooperatives, so owned by non-profit organizations. This is quite peculiar, but I mean, this was an adaptation to the need. Our farmers needed to reach far markets like United States, and they had no instruments. And so they pooled together resources in order to create this organization, and creating a large company that is now very successful in very complicated markets like the American one.
Right. It's wonderful to hear these examples that you share with me and with the audience. To backtrack a little bit, the whole series this week is about the 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development, as well as the preparation of countries who will present at the high-level political forum in July in New York, what they do, what have they been able to do in terms of implementing the SDGs. There is also, at the local level, a very successful initiative to show from city to city what cities are doing about implementing the SDGs. What is happening in the Trento region regarding the SDGs?
Well, Trentino is quite committed, among other regions in Italy, on the environmental side, because it's a fragile territory. Dolomites is the chunk of Alps in this region, one of the most, beautiful part of Alps. They are quite fragile, delicate in terms of environmental challenges. 3 years ago, we had a main phenomenon that destroyed the 15% of all the forests in Trentino. Was a drama. Was a catastrophic event, and the reaction by the local organization and the provincial government, the reaction was to focus more on all the SDGs related with the environment. But with this connection that is always very present in the policies in my country between the social sustainability and the environmental sustainability. So those two layers are perceived as one. in the popular culture of a region like Trentino. You cannot, separate economic performance from social cohesion. And that's, I would say, this is the approach to SDGs that is more present in the debate that we have now in this area.
I have, Gianluca, I have a question from Mr. Park, who is the head of the UN office in Korea that we're now cooperating with. Mr. Park asks you, are there any ways or recommendation how to maintain the quality of the products compared to those produced in other areas, meaning other areas of Italy?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There has been a transition in the last 10, 15 years pushed by consumers. Remember that in the system that I've described, you have both cooperatives on the agricultural side, but also cooperatives on the consumer side.
Yeah.
So you have a continuous dialogue between demand and offer. So the people who are consumers and need to have guarantees in terms of safety of the food that you eat, safety of the way the food is made, and so on.
Yeah.
And in the same system, you have the producers. This means that in the last 10 years, we had a big transition to organic production. So all the apple and all the wine production in Trentino is going towards an organic future because of the, pressure of the consumers within the same movement. And on the other side, there are many pressures also in terms of avoiding to create an imbalance in terms of consumption of natural resources, for instance, water or land.
Yeah,
that is a scarce resource in a mountain region. So these are basic principles present in the strategies of the cooperative movement in this area.
The region of northern Italy, Lombardia, participated in the study about 25 years ago on competitiveness. Has there been also a similar study made about, the diamond of competitiveness, about the factor conditions, a strong buying or purchasing partner, small enterprises, and some more sizable, bigger enterprises? Has this diamond been applied to Trento?
But in Trento, as in most of Italy, except for Lombardy and Piedmont region, the economic basis is funded on micro and small enterprises. So I would say all the Italian systems is more articulated than other countries, than France, than Germany, on very small enterprises. So basically, in Italy, the industrial structure is based on firms with no more than 8-10 people. So this is, the feature, the main element that describe the Italian system. And you will find the same in every region except for Lombardy and Piedmont that are the most industrialized.
I have a follow-on question from Pradeep Bodel. I think it's the last question because we're reaching the end of our today's webinar. And he says, first of all, thank you. I would add myself to it too. You did a great presentation. A quick question. He says, what was the role of the local government and the central government in facilitating these cooperatives or the cooperative model? were they, I'm adding to it, were they actively facilitating, or were they simply not causing problems?
Well, I would say depends. In the first phase, the attitude was not really supporting, but not creating problems. So they were just treating cooperatives as any other enterprise, except for social cooperatives that were a new creator born in the 80s, bottom up in order to react to specific social needs. So social cooperatives is something different because they would not exist without an intervention of the national powers with a specific law. But the cooperative movement developed itself spontaneously, with no special advantages in terms of tax or legal
incentives.
Incentives. They are treated as any other enterprise, except the social cooperatives that do have a tax reduction because they have the obligation to employ disadvantaged people or to serve disadvantaged areas or domains or working on themes that are less served by the public services. So for the rest, I would say in agriculture, in the consumer sector, in the worker-owned organization, like the worker buyout, the treatment from the legal point of view is almost the same that a small and medium enterprise or a family-owned business.
Or a family, yeah. That's an interesting comparison also. I just quickly, there must be quite a few family enterprises too in the Trento region. How do they relate to the cooperatives, or are they part of cooperatives?
No, I would say that in Trentino, because of the development of the cooperative movement, the family-owned businesses are less present than in other Italian regions.
Okay, great. Well, we're coming to the end. Is there anything else that you wanted to add while talking? Maybe you were catching up with one thing you forgot to convey.
No, I want to thank you and Licia for this opportunity to interact with you and all the audience. Thanks.
Great. Same. The pleasure is mutual. So we thank you very much and say goodbye and until soon again.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Jean, I'm looking for Jean.
Yes.
Le voilà.
Le voilà.
But you're not muted. You're not.
I'm not muted now. Can you hear me?
Oh, okay.
Hello?
Yeah. We're fine.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Raymond, and thank you very much also, Licia, for the introduction. Raymond, for this very good moderation. I'd like to also thank, that was a very interesting session. And we had with Daniel, sorry if I don't pronounce well, Von Whitehead, who started with this. He really taught us about the global supply chain, the history, the good side and the flip side. From the goods produced at 100% to by one company, one firm, to a lead firm that with multiple producers around the world, because this is very true now. And then the flip sides, I think we would have liked to. I've seen a lot of questions about how the COVID-19 affected that. So maybe we could have, of course, talked a lot more even on that. And as Daniel said, we could spend a whole meeting on this. But that was very interesting and eye-opening. talking about eye-opening, I see also the presentation from Joshua was very, very interesting about this, about the group youth in Nigeria, youth groups. And again, I mean, about the difficulties and the solutions that were developed by the governments and institutions, but solutions that were either incomplete or not really responding to the needs. But then other solutions came up from initiatives from the youth. So now we need to maybe those two to work together. I think this is coming because we see that the youth are now involved in the legislation in the program for the youth, which was not the case before. And I think now if we don't have too much time, so I'd like to speak more about this. And then Gianluca Salvatore presentation, which was very interesting also, because we see that, and then it really relates to Joshua's presentation, and then even wider, where from the needs and people in, I would say, critical conditions, because he mentioned that, where trust is built, also solidarity. I think was not sure it was named, but solidarity is also part of it.
Yeah.
And that was very interesting to see from the rural agricultural areas of background. And I think Gianluca said that also these could happen, or they happen also in the urban context. It's just we didn't have time to talk about it. But it is interesting how the needs, the necessity, and sometimes being in a critical condition, how it brings people, could bring people together. I really like the idea of bringing. I think, do I have my notes here? We talked. I heard about bringing brains together, network of brains. I think I like very much this idea, and then to educate people. I think that connects people. The youth can educate themselves. This is a response from that came, and I think that's true. It connects to the question you had raised to Joshua somehow. Doesn't mean that people. I mean, it's just again is finding solution, initiative ways of responding when there's a lack, and then when there's no, or the responses that have been developed are not appropriate or complete, so people appropriate themselves these solutions. I think that's very very interesting. And of course, I mean, try to also to connect with the SDGs. And thank you for bringing this all the time, Raymond. I think it was a really really good session. I hope we could have more time, but we don't want to take too much time of our people who are already working very late. So I'd like also to thank the staff from UNOSD who are working not behind me, but behind the scene, and that who make this all working very well. And then because they do a very critical work for this, so I think that's we should also.
Yeah, we very much agree with you and thank them. Excellent support.
So and then I'd like to also to invite people tomorrow because it's not over. We have another great meeting tomorrow, Wednesday, 24th of March, and we'll be speaking on the SDG, the goal 12 on responsible, sustainable consumption and production. So same time, and people again, you need to register for that session. So each session you have to register. So tomorrow same time, and please, as Licia said, finish the survey by very when you get out of you just about to go out of the session, you'll be asked, you'll see the survey. Please complete the survey. We need that information to improve as we go over the week and in the future as well. So with this, I think unless Licia wants to say a word, I will. He wants no. So I will close this session, and thank you very much, everyone. Wherever you are around the world, we appreciate to be with you, and we are looking forward to seeing you tomorrow night, tomorrow morning, and tomorrow afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you so much.